Tal, are you in the room?
Hi.
Hello. Give us what you got.
Yeah, I'm going to share some slides with you, and this will also lead us to the questions that you asked us to prepare in advance. So these are really just a couple of slides discussing or describing our study on the posthumous privacy paradox. And so privacy scholars look at the privacy paradox, which is something that was pointed out by various scholars, the gap between how people express their wishes about their privacy and how they behave in real life. And Michael and I decided to look into this privacy paradox and to check whether it applies also to the posthumous condition, to the digital remains, and whether people express wishes and behave in a similar way. So I don't have the time to go into too much details here in this short presentation, but our findings and analysis suggest that there is a posthumous privacy paradox. And this means that the preferences people have about accessing their digital remains do not match their behavior in life. And there is this juxtaposition of preferences and behavior, which shows that there is that kind of the in-life privacy paradox that applies also to the posthumous condition, which means that people that wish to keep their information private do not act in a way that will allow people to, that will keep this information private after they die, which means that after they die, this information might be available for other people. And there is also the inverted paradox. And this paradox is novel, we think, since it shows that people wish to be private, sorry, not to be private in their lives, but their actions suggest that they will become private after they die, that the information that they wish to leave behind for other people to be able to access will not be accessible to them because of their behavior in real life. And I think this table shows us the complexity of privacy and posthumous privacy, and the way we understand the wishes that we have about managing our online persona in the afterlife, in the way that the people, that the continuity of wishes and the continuity of management of access to information is not necessarily going to be the same in the afterlife. So we have some questions that we wrote down for discussion, and I think they also link nicely to other discussions that we have today. We had this discussion about who needs to manage the access to digital remains, or who needs to regulate digital remains. But there is a question, social questions. How do we make the discussion about managing access to digital remains something that everybody can take part in? Because our feeling is that not too many people are willing to engage in such discussion. And our findings also suggest that the use of the legacy contact or the inactive account manager is very low, and many people do not want to or do not wish to engage in this discussion in their life. So there is this social questions of how do we make this discussion something that people can relate to. The second question is about the knowledge people have about on managing access to digital remains. Here too, we see that many people are not aware of the possibilities or never have thought about the option of leaving access or denying access to their digital remains. This is something that people sometimes only notice once they encounter something that happened to their relatives or friends. But many people have not considered what will happen to their digital remains, and we need to do something with regards to the awareness on these issues. And lastly, the question for the lawyers, perhaps, is how, if at all, should we regulate posthumous privacy? So these are some questions for discussions, and that's our very short presentation. And I will put the link to our paper in the chat. Thank you. Stop share.
Thank you, Tal. Very much appreciated. Shall we go ahead and talk to Carl and Steph? I scribbled down quite a few questions there, and other people might have questions as well for the discussion. Shall we do Carl and then Stacy, and then we'll all kind of come together and start asking and answering on all sides?
I was wondering whether it would be useful to follow up on some of Tal's questions first, because they're kind of quite poignant, and then maybe go into the next presentation.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine with me. Yeah, for sure.
Sorry, I'm going to mute.
That's okay. Don't worry. I mean, anybody did you have a particular question that you wanted to, is there a response you wanted to make, Maggie, to one of Tal's or more of Tal's questions?
I'm going to wait because we've got drilling going on and let everybody.
Okay, fair enough. All right. So kind of Tal's questions, if whether you had made note of them or not, I don't think I wrote them down specifically, but whether we should regulate these, how to overcome information deficiencies, and how we normalize discussions about posthumous preferences. I had a sort of a question and a bit of a tangent to that. And sorry, I've got drilling in the background as well, pneumatic, I believe. I was in surveying your participants in your research, whether you refer to sort of your data or your information, or whether there are questions that get to whether people see the information that they've got out there as being connected to other informational bodies, or whether, I guess, even the way you ask a question or the way the kind of research is conducted almost treats it as like, oh, your packet of information or your digital remains. Do your participants seem to have a sense of how interconnected this information is, Tal?
So the analysis that we present here is from a quantitative survey that we conducted. So we don't really have an answer to this question. We asked them about their preferences, and we also asked them about their behavior, how they manage access to their devices and accounts. And we then combined the data and did the analysis. However, we also conducted focus groups, and in the focus groups, we were able to probe more into these questions. And it seems that, you know, there is a variance. Some people are very well aware of how they manage their personal data, but many people have not thought about it before we introduced these questions to them. You know, we invited them to discuss some social networks issues and stuff like that. But when we confronted them with these questions, only then it occurred to them that there is this data that they will leave behind them. And it might be accessible to someone, it might not be accessible. Some of them wish to leave access to their children or to their parents or to their spouses, and some expressed the opposite wish. And something that was very funny to notice, once we ended the focus groups, we very often saw that people right away, or sometimes even during the focus groups, they were looking for the online tools that they can manage access to their digital remains. So this is something that was very pressing for them. But before we invited them to the focus groups, they had never thought about it.
Just looking in questions, see it in the sort of chat here. So, Jonathan says, not to go all Kevin Costner, but I do wonder how much the answers to the first questions might be something along the lines of, if you build it, they will come. If they build what in particular, Jonathan?
I was typing out the answer there, actually.
Not fast enough.
Yes, basically, I'm wondering how much, and of course, I'm through and through doctrinal lawyer here, so I'm not claiming any insight into anything more than that. But I do get the sense that there is, with most people until they reach a certain point in life, a reluctance to make a will or to engage with what lawyers would recognise as being concerned with the law of succession generally. Likewise, I think there's a general reluctance to consider things such as advance directives. What should happen if you're in a horrible accident? When can we withdraw medical treatment, etc.? So with that situation, we're dealing with a generalized reluctance already. And so I'm wondering if the reluctance here in connection with digital assets and the like is simply compounded by the fact that there isn't a neat, generalizable framework from which to build on. Because in addition to dealing with a subject that most people don't like to think about, there isn't much that even lawyers who are in day-to-day high street practice would be able to advise people in connection with this. You know, it's great that we're all here, we're all talking about this sort of thing today, but there is that usual divide between what folk are doing on a day-to-day basis in that. So when I'm saying that if we build it, they will come, basically I'm just wondering if we did develop the sort of framework that we're talking about in this sort of context, wouldn't the problem rather solve itself? Because in the same way that it can be perfectly normal for a person to be prompted into making a decision in connection with an advance directive by a medical professional, or prompted into making a will by a financial planner, that someone, if we have this framework, someone who's fulfilling that same kind of role could prompt you. Have you ever thought about what to do about all of this if you die? I mean, what's going to happen to this? And just by having that potential for the discussion there, yeah, I just wonder, as I say, if the problem resolves itself, or if I'm missing the point completely, please do.
I don't think so. And Tal, I'm curious about what you think, but what sounds to me like, Tal, what you experienced in the group there with people in the focus group actually picking up their devices and saying, oh, where do I do it? Is that they were nudged by the focus group and by their awareness into an action. And there was actually something clear and simple that they could do to act upon what you were saying. And then the nudging happened in the focus group. And if there's anything that a lot of these platforms are good at, it is behavioral nudging. And if the framework, if there were clear and neat and clear and simple frameworks that were more kind of universal, or that were more, you know, and people could be effectively nudged towards them by the same kinds of means that, you know, are employed all the time for other purposes, then that could get us a huge amount of the way there. But that, you know, again, presupposes the neatness and clarity and the simplicity and the generalized kind of frameworks that we would all like to see. I'm aware that Stacy has her hand up and somebody else, and Vasilis has his hand up, but Tal, I didn't know whether you wanted to say anything in response to Jonathan in the first instance.
I agree with what you said. I think once people are become aware of the options, they tend to be more active about it. However, I can also share my personal experience when I tried to activate my inactive account manager. It was very simple as long as I needed just to tick some boxes and move on to the next screen. But once I needed to leave a message to the people that will get access to my digital remains, and once I realized that this message will meet them after I die, then I froze. I was unable to complete the process. So it's not. There is something more about it. We need to have to undergo some process before we actually sit down and activate these tools. So it's not only about awareness, I think.
Yeah, you hit a pain point there on a couple different levels. Stacy, I'm aware that you've had your hand up for a couple minutes.
No, that's fine. And I mean, I'm probably going to cross over with stuff that I would have talked about otherwise than talking. But I mean, I've been working on a project for quite a few years called Love After Death, which some of you may or may not be familiar with, which explores choice at the end of life around our body, creative bereavement, and digital assets in public spaces, particularly in libraries. And at the moment, we've got this project running in 3 libraries, and we've been exploring it across the period of COVID as well, because COVID has also opened up a different kind of, I guess, opening up around conversations around death and dying. And I think that public spaces like libraries are really interesting places to open these conversations out, because they're not as immediate as perhaps hospices or other environments. And they allow for, I guess, a bit of speculation and a bit of kind of imagined response as well, because of the nature of books and being in that kind of environment. So exploring the policy with libraries as well around everyone having the possibility to access information about choice at the end of life. So kind of exploring that policy angle too. But I've also done a little bit of work with some of the hospitals, like the Royal Free Hospitals in London, around kind of including things like digital death in the advanced care planning, and kind of exploring different ways that, I guess, these ideas that we've been talking about for most of us, like 10 years or so now, seeing places and institutions that begin to shape those conversations on a public level, where they're not specifically about the technologies, or they're not specifically about dying in the immediate, I guess, sense. So that was just my sort of reflection on that.
Vasilios, you had your hand up. Would you like to?
Yeah, thanks, Elaine. I'm conscious most of you know each other from previous sessions, and I'm very new to this. But I wanted to come at it from a very different perspective, I guess. I do a lot of cyber awareness. So I'm a lawyer by background, but I have moved into a school of criminology, and I run a cybercrime awareness clinic. And part of what we do is go out to the community and provide advice and guidance. We get involved in different projects with law enforcement, European Commission, and so on. But part of our activities as well is to go out to the community and speak to different groups, different vulnerable groups. And we speak to young people, we speak to businesses, we speak to older people, we speak to people with disabilities, and so on. And I really found Tal's point and then Jonathan's comment really interesting in terms of how do we make this discussion non-taboo. And Jonathan said, if you build it, they will come. And I wanted to share my experience to say, if you build it, they won't come. You have to go to them. Which is quite challenging. So when we launched the clinic, we thought, yes, we'll have this open space where people can come and seek advice, and everyone will just come, and we need to have appointments because we won't be able to deal with the amount of people that will come for free advice. And then people were not booking. So we had to go out to them and integrate ourselves into already pre-existing groups and try to convince the facilitators of the groups why cyber awareness was really interesting. And I've done cyber awareness now for 4 years. I have to tell you, I've never seen any guidance or any tips or any points in all the documents I've seen from various different law enforcement agencies, National Cybersecurity Center, any other government related documents that reach out as cyber awareness advice that have any sort of reference to this particular area. So I'm sort of spoiling one of my main questions for my session that is in the next kind of group of talks. But what I wanted to say is that for me, it would be really difficult to actually integrate this part of the advice within the regular cyber awareness advice I give. I have a talk with the University of Third Age tomorrow to answer questions. And I was thinking, how can I integrate some advice in relation to this without actually making these people feel, oh, he's telling us this because we're old and we're about to die, and he's sort of offending us. And how can I integrate advice like this to schools and colleges that I go to, where people feel this is such a distant kind of thing in relation to their young lives, that they wouldn't really bother. So for me, this is one of the challenging things, and I don't know how you can achieve that. It needs to be very delicately designed, I think. And people don't come to you for cybersecurity advice. They just shy away. They know the basics. And if people are finding it challenging to do two-factor authentication, then it's definitely far more complicated to sort this out. And especially, as Tal said, imagine having to get to the point. Imagine you're sick or you're old and you have to come to the point where you actually have to write this message after you've navigated all this scary kind of environment with bullet sort of tick boxes and terms that you might not fully understand and so on. And I think everyone will just, you know, close the browser and leave it for another day, maybe.
Thank you, Vasilios. There's a lot in there. I was noticing in the comments, Judd's comment, that you have to build it, or when you go to them, you won't have anything for them. And I was thinking about, you know, presentations I might have given at the Society for Trust and Estate Practitioners, like under the guise of like training and information, but then you realize that all you're really telling them is what a mess there is actually. You don't really have anything that, you know, and so because these frameworks aren't built, you know, even when you do go to them, you know, it's really, really, or a difficult landscape. I'm also aware of the comment Felicity was talking about in the comment about, you know, making legacy sort of choices part of the whole suite, where you have to make choices about privacy and sort of all those kinds of settings. But of course, there's such an unequal trade-off in people's completion of those settings, you know, just ticking things fast for convenience or gratification or expediency, and not necessarily really understanding kind of fully the consequences of their decisions. You would never kind of like make a will in 30 seconds while you're deciding whether you want to sort of sign up to an app, you know, but we'd be sort of doing the equivalent of that, I suppose. So it's a difficult one, but thanks very much for your comments in the chat. And Tamara is right. I wish that Megan were here as well. Megan Yip has some fantastic explanatory literature including for older folks. So Megan is missed.
Can I just add that there are, maybe not in government, but certainly in other organisations. So there's certainly an organisation called Omega, which runs sessions for older people for planning and digital. I would like to call it digital fluency rather than digital literacy, and also part of the network learning for the Church of England, which is also trying to deal with some of the cyber issues, and they've got a specific life event advisor, which includes dealing with death and funerals and the digital. So there are some, but they're probably quite hidden.
Absolutely. It's kind of luck of the draw, isn't it? Sort of like who you're fortunate enough to kind of come into the purview of. So I'm aware of that sort of time moving on, wanting to make sure that Carl and Stacey get their voices in here so that we can then sort of
Yeah,
discuss
absolutely.
broadly.